It is such a pleasure to be with you here today, and I'm coming to you by way of being a practitioner in culturally proficient educational practice. My intention today is to share with you my journey of implementing ethnic studies at both the school site and throughout a district. It was lots of challenges doing this, and I'm proud to say that Santa Maria Joint Union High School District did it before it became a state mandate. I want to start off by reading something from Margaret Wheatley. As you know, those of us in the educational field recognize and realize that what's happening outside the fence lines affects what's happening within the fence lines. And so I always want to recognize ongoing challenges that I think validate the importance of this work that we do as educators and as culturally competent educators. This is from an article that she actually wrote, it's actually a book, that she wrote 21 years ago. It's called Turning to One Another. It goes like this. It says, our 21st century world is descending into aggression, fear, separation, war, genocide, violence, slavery, pandemics, poverty, natural disasters. All of these are commonplace in this new century, despite most people's deep longing to live together in peace. What are we going to do about this? What role do we choose to play? Do we withdraw and hope to at least live a satisfying private life? Or do we turn to one another and do what we can to birth a healthy future? I'm hoping that you're someone who's ready to work with others to restore hope to the future. There are millions of us out there in this world. We truly welcome you in joining us today. I think it's really important to understand that the work that we do as individuals and as members of an organization is really to inform our young people of how to navigate and move forward through the world well after we're done helping educate them in a way that could really build a more hopeful society. Okay, I know that you have folders with a lot of the information that I'm going to be turning to today. However, if you would like an electronic copy of those things, you could copy this bit.ly or use the QR code. It will give you access to some of the materials that we're going to use today to do some of the activities. I have 3 activities to go over with you today. It really is a short amount of time to try to cover at any significant depth, cultural proficiency in the tools, but I think you'll find it very helpful as an introduction to understanding the conceptual framework for culturally proficient educational practice. Now, I know that Los Angeles County Office of Ed has their own land acknowledgement, and I really applaud you for doing that. But I wanted to share with you an example of a land acknowledgement with a school district that I recently had the privilege of training in the cultural proficiency certification. This is from San Gabriel Unified School District. Anybody here from San Gabriel? Well, if you see anyone from San Gabriel, tell them that I was really impressed with their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they did this presentation as part of their culminating project for the certification, and they actually drew in this land acknowledgement created by a student. And again, I think this all goes to the importance of ethnic studies to really inform our students about our true history, perhaps history that we don't necessarily cover. I can tell you that when I was going through school, I went through public school in Calexico, California. We really didn't get any kind of history that I felt connected to relative to my culture and my heritage. And I grew up in California. So I'm not going to read this, but I just wanted to share this with you as a land acknowledgement that was created by a student, which I think San Gabriel's not too far from here. So what are we going to cover today? On today's agenda, we're going to set the context, and then we're going to touch on to what does it mean to have a culturally proficient lens, or why is it important to ethnic studies? Now, I will say this. When I was at Santa Maria, one of the first training programs that I really championed for was to bring in cultural proficiency. And to do that, we reached out to Drs. Randy and Dolores Lindsay from the Center for Culturally Proficient Educational Practice. I felt that our school climate at the time had become very toxic and had moved away from being student-focused and family-focused. And so we needed a framework or a program to refocus our lens. And so we did bring in cultural proficiency, and that really did inform our lens for then looking towards ethnic studies. We recognized that with particularly our student population, we needed something to really connect them to wanting to learn, wanting to be connected to their learning. And so at the time, we only had one Chicano Studies class. And what we ended up doing was connecting with our community, which you'll hear later is really important in the implementation of ethnic studies. There are three components, which I'll go over a little later. But that's the tie-in that I want to make with you today about how having that culturally proficient lens really helped me both as a teacher and as an administrator, both at the site and the district level, to champion for ethnic studies. So today, there's three strategies that I would like for us to keep in mind as we're going through my presentation. One is I'm going to use strategies to support your learning that I would hope that you would also consider taking some of these strategies and activities back to your school sites or back to your departments or your colleagues so that you can help also widen the lens of cultural proficiency for all your colleagues. And the third part is if that maybe you might consider assisting the EDI department with facilitating some of these lessons or some of these strategies as well. These are the typical learning agreements that I use in this training, is that please, as much as possible, be 100% present, because our hope is that we will create a necessary space for people to be able to share with their experiences, their perspectives in a way that is meaningful and authentic, because that's where the work really, really gains. Listen and participate to seek and understand. I have to tell you that as an administrator and a teacher, I had to really practice good listening skills. And those listening skills begin with understanding that my eyes and my experiences are connected to my ears. And it's important to be able to listen with an open mind, with an empathetic mind, and to seek to understand. Not to necessarily figure out who's right or who's wrong, but to truly understand. I would ask that today, when we ask you to share, tell your own story. Using I, me, my, or myself. Speak on your story. That is where your best experience is, and we don't want to broad brush that we're speaking for any one particular ethnic group or race. Also, learn about yourself and learn about others. The cultural proficiency journey is what I call it, begins with the inside out. And so, as you heard in my bio, I spent 25 years in the United States Navy, and that created a very conservative lens and a lot of really leaning into being very nationalistic, right? It's like patriotic and all of that. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. However, it didn't lend itself to be open to other points of view, not to mention the fact that, as I just mentioned earlier, when I was going through elementary school, junior high, and high school, I really didn't get a whole lot in the way of what I would call a complete history of the United States and understanding a lot of the power dynamics that are actually at play and what it means when we say the playing field is not level, right? And so that took a lot of inside out. That took a lot about learning about myself, understanding why I had the lens that I did, and being able to grow and learn as an educator. You heard me mention necessary space. This is work that actually began with working with Dr. Williams. He's brought this to other training that we're giving other leaders. And I like the term necessary space because sometimes people will say that it's very ambitious of us to try to create an ethnic studies graduation requirement, or it's very ambitious of us to try to build relationships in this very divisive time in our country. Well, I would push back and say it's not ambitious, it's necessary. So this is a necessary space. The other term that I use is this should be an accountable space. We used to use the term safe space, but I don't use it anymore because I recognize that for people that have been marginalized or oppressed, or maybe in some cases completely misunderstood or invisible, that it can never really be a truly safe space. And so we want to make it a necessary space with accountability so that when we share our stories, we make it in a way that, we do it in a way that invites different perspectives. So at this moment, I'd like for you all to read this on your own and have conversation at your tables. Share your reflections, turn and talk to one another, and then I'm going to ask you to share out briefly on what your perspective is on an invitation to create a necessary space. If it would help, I could read it. I'll go ahead and read it, and that way you can, for those of you that maybe not be able to see it so far back, I'll read it. Together, we will bravely create necessary space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think and know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our necessary space together, and we will work on it side by side. So now turn and talk, and be ready to share out your thoughts about this invitation.
All right. Good morning. I had the pleasure of speaking with my brother William over here, and we were talking just about this idea of moving away from safe spaces. Safe spaces are places that you can choose to be in if you'd like to. A necessary space, it's call them a call of action, that this is something we have to engage in. We also talked about the idea, there are certain words in here that stand out, the idea of growing, knowing, love, and this is just kind of a human statement to humanize and put everybody on the same and equal level, to make sure people think about the responsibility and the connection we all have in terms of the trauma potentially that we bring to the space, but also the wish to resolve any of the issues of harm that we may be feeling. We've been harmed personally, and obviously wishing not to make sure that our kids or staff in this context aren't harmed any further. But we have to engage in this work.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That's spot on. Now, someone else, please. Someone else. Oh, right over here. Thank you.
Good morning. So we were just talking about how that necessary space sometimes looked like a student in need. So a student comes in crying, whatever, and instead of saying, hey, let's get class started, I take the kid outside. What's going on? Because apparently there's something more going on if they're able to show us that there's some emotion. And so, I just don't want to treat all my students like we have this machine. We've got to keep working. Let's keep going. If a kid needs something, I gotta be there for that kid, even if it's for a minute or 2 minutes, just to let them know, okay, maybe my counseling is not perfect because I'm an English teacher, but I certainly want you to know that I see you. There's something going on with you, and I want you to know that we all have something going on, but we're all able to compartmentalize for the moment, and maybe you're not. So that's what we were talking about.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Absolutely. On our worst day could be the very day that makes or breaks our connection with the student and their education. I'll never forget that. That was something that I learned along the way. And so it's kind of like prioritizing, right? I call it a moment to gain. When you show people that you're willing to step out and listen and that you are in tune with how they're feeling, that is a moment to gain. Thank you very much for that. Both responses were spot on. It is a necessary space. It is important. We have to stop sidestepping these conversations. I can tell you one thing for certain. Students are having these conversations. And so we need to be able to navigate these conversations and engage. We need to be able to address them head on. And the students will turn to you as they normally do. As I move on, there's also these norms that we have used in training, which I understand that you have used some of these in your own training. And so, again, these are conversation key points to acknowledge that it's a necessary space, an accountable space, and it's opening up the invitation for dialogue. If you're wondering how I got here, a while back, this was an institute that I put on with a Hectal Win philosophy. We put this on with a lead from CSU San Bernardino, and this is where I first made that connection between the implementing ethnic studies and how having that culturally proficient lens was really important for me to be able to do it. Here's the key word: do it authentically and with fidelity, right? And so, as you can imagine, military veteran, 25 years, it was a little difficult at first to get into the conversation and the understanding of colonization, decolonization, when I was serving in the United States Navy all over the world, which has a huge history of its role that it's played in colonization, right? So some of these things tend to bump up against our belief systems, our values. The key to being culturally competent is being willing to challenge our own assumptions. So what is cultural proficiency? I'm going to share other terms like culturally responsive, culturally relevant. Cultural proficiency here are 3 examples of what they are. Oftentimes when I do my training on cultural proficiency, people just kind of assume it's about learning about other cultures. That's not what it really is about, because we could spend our entire lives and we won't know everything about every culture. Cultural proficiency is about developing a lens that recognizes that this is a lifelong journey, that one perspective is not better or more important than another, or as I tell people, you'll know you've developed a culturally proficient school climate when people will feel welcome no matter what culture they come to you from. Okay, so this is a key point. It really is a paradigm shift. It's moving away from seeing culture, diversity, equity, inclusion as a problem to be solved or as problematic. It's more about seeing it as a tipping point from viewing cultural differences as a deficit to viewing it more as an asset. A lot of times our lens due to unconscious bias, which I'm glad to see Dr. Marks is back with you again today. Unconscious bias, stereotype thinking, deficit thinking, all these things are affecting the way our lens operates. And so it really does require us to be aware of that and to check our assumptions. As I said before, it is about an inside-out journey. Inside out as individuals, and inside out as individuals of your organization. Recognize that everyone in your organization contributes to the culture of your organization. So when we talk about cultural proficiency, let's think about it beyond race and ethnicity. Let's truly think about it from the point of organizational culture. If someone goes to your school and they don't feel welcomed, then that's your school site culture. And so that's what we really want to focus. Do we make people feel a sense of belonging, or is there maybe a trepidation and uncomfortableness of being in our schools or in our organizations? And that's all based on the lens that we all have. Now, I want to make something very clear when I say the lens. It's not like glasses. Like I can take them on, I can take them off, and put them on anytime. That's not the lens. The lens I'm talking about is more like what I had when I was in the Navy. I had that PRK. It's like that laser surgery. It never comes off, right? It's laser surgery, so it's not a thing, not a sometimes thing. It's not even an extra thing. It's the lens through which you see everything that you do in education, parent meetings, community engagement, staff meetings, curriculum and instruction, hiring practices, interviews, promotion, everything. So don't think about cultural proficiency as something extra. Think about it as the lens through which you see everything, or as I like to say sometimes, it is the plate on which everything else that we do in education sits upon. Now I'm going to show you a quick video. It's 1 minute long, and then you're going to turn and talk. I apologize to our school here because it does not contain captions. I apologize in advance. However, I think it could still have the same effect as you look at the video. It's only 1 minute long. I want you to pay close attention to yourselves, to your lens, what you're seeing, and what's happening within you, your inside out. So let's give this a try.
This is the Fletcher Street crew through the lens of Google Pixel 2. This is their neighborhood. These are the streets where they were born and raised. And this is what keeps them off the streets. These are the horses they take care of. Dusty, Nikki, and Big Mama. This is how they bring the people of Fletcher Street together. Give me your love, baby. You got and here are the kids that look up to them. There's a deeper story behind every picture. Question your lens.
So here's your opportunity for reflection, dialogue, and action. So at your table, talk about what is your reaction, or how did you feel when you saw the video, when you started? What did you see? And what actions might you take with this information? So go ahead and turn and talk. Thinking about the video, what did you see and how did you feel? And what actions might you take with this information?
Hello. My reaction was I had to put like 3 feeling words. It would be curious and happy and then a little perplexed at the end because it was a Google Pixel commercial. I don't know how I feel about that. But I took a lot of notes about what I heard because I really liked the music that they used in the background. One of the lyrics that they put was, it was when they were showing the horses, they said, "Time to rise." And then right before they showed how those people were role models. The men on the streets were models. They said, "Give me your love, you got mine." And I just thought all the little snapshots of their life, all the little snapshots of their faces, seeing just like the horses just have so much vibrance and color really makes me want to get a Google Pixel phone. And also really, I just thought it was really cool that they get to have a platform to show their story. This made me think about how, as a new educator, especially when I teach English, I really want to find a way to incorporate phone literacy into my classroom, specifically with social media and specifically with TikTok, because I think our kids have so much power in their hands with that phone, and they're also addicted to their phones as well. So how much power can we give our students when we give them tools to use that phone, use that one screen of power to make such a small compilation, something that's just a few seconds, just a minute? How can we have that where it has this same effect, where they get to showcase not only their stories, but they get to talk about something that they're passionately active in? So I think my next steps is learning how to edit TikTok for myself and figuring out how I, as an educator, could think about my own social media presence as well, because I think that's really important.
And you know, we do have to be aware of generational differences. You know, I followed up on the different generations, and right now, kids at the age of 9 are the most diverse generation of all the generations before them. Someone else? Oh.
Hello? When I was watching the video and just looking at the background, my honest and like real gut reaction was obviously like, oh, they're trying to show me inner city kids, are they struggling and all those things. But in this space, like in kind of being clued into what we're gonna talk about with implicit bias and things like that, I also have my second reaction, which is to check that voice, right? And to be honest with myself, because the second face I saw was a kid who just looked exactly like one of our football players. And so that was my kid, right? And so my next reaction was that these kids are our kids, and they're us. And so I felt this sense of like, well, that's my kids that I'm supposed to be looking after. So, but I had this conflicting kind of first response to that, undoing that socialization that I've been taught, right, is to make these assumptions about who they are and where they come from, and then immediately have to do the work of like, stop, this is actually, those are your guys. And so recenter myself and think. So that's my honest reaction when I see that. And I thought it was kind of good just to have the opportunity to constantly do that unlearning, right? And to be honest about that.
Thank you. One more. Okay.
As I was watching it, I felt this tension within myself of a great deal of suspicion and wanting to be protective, like, you know, being very aware that it's a commercial, right? And that Google is playing on assumptions and biases that people have, and so then going, well, what are they going to do with this? Like, keeping them off the streets. Because nobody's trying to keep people off the streets of Beverly Hills. So like, what do they mean by the streets? And why, you know, obviously the people are doing positive things, but how often is Google showing a full cast of Black people, right? Young Black men in a city, you know, and the dichotomies that they create, like, to sell a product, like, is this exploitive or not? And just trying to hold that in, like, or is it good that they're showing that this is inside? People need to see this, but also, like, why is it that we need to prove our humanity? Because nobody else is being asked to prove their humanity. Like, nobody is asking young white people, young Asian people to prove that they are safe. And that when they stand on a corner or sit in a corner or pass each other a card, have a greeting, that their humanity is valid, that their humanity is safe, and that it shouldn't be viewed with suspicion. I mean, that Google is trying to show that, but the very fact that it needs to be shown holds attention.
Thank you all for sharing.
No matter how many times I've shown this video, it's pretty much the same. People tense up, but as soon as the horses come out, people relax. The same thing comes up about stereotypes. But the question is this. I'm pretty sure everybody had a shift in this video. So it is recognizing that that's the shape of our lens, and how can we reshape that lens to not jump to those conclusions or those negative thoughts. That's actually a very positive commercial. Doesn't start out that way though, is what most people tell me, right? It starts out kind of tense, and it evokes emotions within us. It evokes fears and ignorance. And so having a culturally confident lens is like this gentleman over here said, it's checking our assumptions. And that's really because we're bombarded by these images, to your point over here, about why is it that it has to be portrayed, and the disparities of how people are portrayed, right? When we see black and brown faces, does that tend to be mainly during negative events? And vice versa, you know, where are we developing this consciousness? And I would tell you that that is why this four-step process was important to me in my growth. This is from Paulo Freire's work about the fourfold call to action. We all just shared a little bit of our critical awareness about that commercial, right? You all have this critical awareness. And it's then having to go through this critical reflection, critical analysis, and then what I like to call the praxis. When we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there has to be action behind it. If there is no action, it is not equity. And so you have to make this intentional action or call to activism. And I know you can't see it very well there, but those are the 4 tools of cultural proficiency cycle. And it's using the same fourfold call to creating a more culturally proficient lens. The other thing that I experienced as an administrator and as a leader is that we need to move away from being transformational leaders. And as educators, I consider us all leaders. And so we need to really move to what Dr. Carolyn Shields calls transformative leadership, which moves us away from transformational. Transformational is what we're pretty used to, and we call that continuous school improvement. So transformational is the cycle of school improvement. It's not really changing the system, it's just trying to get better results. Transformative is actually looking at the status quo, challenging status quo systems, and being able to recognize when some of the system is inequitable. And that's really what we want to do with our culturally proficient lens, is challenge existing frameworks. These are some of the knowledge frameworks. And again, this is my journey. This is what I recognize was getting in the way with my culturally proficient lens. Institutional barriers like the school-to-prison pipeline, the push-out, as it's been called, denying access to certain students, marginalization and blame, deficit perspectives of students and families. I can't tell you how many times I heard, well, if those students would just work harder, or if those families would care. Which leads also to the next perspective or knowledge frame. Neoliberalism is the one that's based on individuality. In other words, it believes that we're all responsible for the position we find ourselves in, which it's true to a certain extent, but it's not taking into account the systems that put some people in those states versus other people. And so it's kind of like why I stopped saying, well, if I did it, you can do it. But not everybody has the skill or the potential that I have, right? There's always survivors, but that doesn't mean the system doesn't need to be fixed, right? And I will tell you, my personal opinion, my journey, the system is not broken. It is giving us the results it was actually designed to give us. So it's not about fixing a broken system. It's about changing the system. And ethnic studies does that. That's a game changer. The myth of meritocracy. It is literally impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I tried it. Didn't work. I wanted to test it. You know, I'm a researcher. I want to test it. Okay, let me try it. No, it doesn't work. And the problem with that is it doesn't mean that you shouldn't work hard or be resilient. It just means that there are some people that work as hard as they can and still don't get to where they need to get to because it is wrought with barriers. And barriers are one of the tools of overcoming getting a culturally proficient lens. And then it's understanding the difference between equality and equity. That's very important. It's about being not data-driven, that's a great term. I've heard it in education all my years, but it's being driven by the right data. What is giving us the data that we're seeing? What is it telling us? I'll give you a quick example. I was in charge of the attendance review board, and I noticed that we had a lot of Mixteco families and students coming to the attendance review board. They made up over 50% of the attendance review board cases. But yet, they were only 18% of the population of my school. What's going on there? So let's ask those questions. Is it a referral process? Is it us not understanding how to communicate with parents? And so these are all the things that I had to go through internally to really become a more culturally competent educator. So I'm sharing this with you because it does require really a retraining or reprogramming of how we see the world and how we've experienced it, right? And I said, you know, something that I always say is that education tends to be a closed loop system because you have us going through public school or college or wherever, we get into our teaching, go to college to become teachers, we do our student teaching, we become teachers, and then we become administrators, and so forth and so forth. So it doesn't lend itself, I think, to be able to check itself. And so that's really what occurred to me. You know, because this is about ethnic studies, I have to tell you, when I was looking at the implementation of ethnic studies at our school and our district, I had to do a lot of my own research and, you know, went to conferences with a lot of the ethnic studies experts, if you will. We actually also created a partnership with Cal Poly University, which, if you know Cal Poly University, it's predominantly white, but we were able to serve each other because it was beneficial to both of us. And so this is a TED Talk video that I really share with other people because it studies really well. Has anybody seen it? Oh, okay. Yesterday, when I was looking at the emails and I noticed Ron in the email line, I said, oh man, I told my wife, now I'm going to be really nervous. But this is about 15 minutes long. I want to share it with you because he brings out some very important points. If I could leave you with anything, is this. When you implement ethnic studies, you have to really implement it with fidelity. Otherwise, it could lose its effectiveness, let's say. And so that's why our partnership with the university and other ethnic studies groups was very important. And so I'm going to show this video. It's about 15 minutes. If you feel that you need to get up or move around, that's fine. And then we're going to come back into the second activity of the day. So without any further ado, and Ron, I'm glad you're here. Because if there's any questions, I'm going to say, well, let's ask Ron.
My name is Ron Espiritu. I am an educator. For the past 9 years, I've been teaching ethnic studies, Chicano studies, and African American studies to high school students in South Los Angeles. And what I found working with my young people is that ethnic studies is empowering, is liberating, and is transformative for our young people. A growing body of research from scholars from across the country have shown and proven that ethnic studies has positive academic and social results for students of all races and ethnic backgrounds. Now, despite my own experiences and this research, ethnic studies continues to remain invisible for students at the K-12 level. And in the state of Arizona, ethnic studies has even been banned. Books by Latino authors have been pulled from the shelf in front of students' eyes, and they're told that it's illegal for them to read these books in the classroom. So how do we get to a point in 2014 where an entire state can ban a proven academic program? And to answer that question, I want to begin with the story of my grandmother, Margarita Pedraza. My grandmother grew up in San Antonio, Texas in the 1930s, and when she was going to elementary school, she was told that speaking Spanish was illegal. She was forced to wear a sign around her neck that says, "I won't speak Spanish." She was physically intimidated and abused by her teachers and her administrators. And sadly, this experience is common for many Mexican American, Latinos, and other immigrants that have come into this country. And so in many ways, the story of my grandmother was a defining moment for me, and it was a defining moment for my mother, Dora Espiritu, who used the experiences of my grandmother as an inspiration to become an educator herself, and she became a bilingual education teacher. And in 1975 in San Antonio, Texas, after the historic Lau versus Nichols Supreme Court case that overturned these unjust laws, my mother began teaching at the very same school that my grandmother attended. Except this time, my mother was breaking the cycle, and she was making students feel proud of their linguistic abilities. She later went on to become a principal of a highly successful dual language immersion program that had incredible results. My father, David Espiritu, was also an educator for over 30 years, and he was also a principal of bilingual education school in San Antonio, Texas, that had incredible results for the students and was a model for the district and the city. My parents inspired my two older sisters to become teachers, and they also inspired me to become a teacher. And we had this incredible model and example that as a teacher, you must respect the community that your students are in, and you must make them proud of their linguistic abilities and proud of their heritage. You see, I went to school in the 1990s in San Antonio, Texas, and while it was very different from my grandmother's experience, maybe in some ways it wasn't so different. I never read a book by a Latino author or an African American author. I studied Mexican American history on May 22nd, a day before the school year ended. And it wasn't until I got here to Amherst College and I took my first Black Studies course that I realized that there was an entire academic discipline that I had been cut off from. And as I learned about the struggles of African Americans and other ethnicities and the Black liberation struggle, I became inspired to figure out who I was as a Chicano male from South Texas. I became hungry for knowledge. I became inspired, and once I found myself placed on the historical timeline, I became an intellectual. I was a student participant and a student organizer of an event called Voices for the Voiceless. And through this event, I met people like Jaime Shaggy Flores that connected me to these literary movements that I knew nothing about. I met people like veteran Chicano poet Raul Salinas, who taught me about my indigenous background as a Chicano. I met Luis Reyes Rivera, who taught me about the intersections between people of African descent and Puerto Ricans. And I met Carmen Tafoya, who was the poet laureate of San Antonio, Texas, who's one of the banned authors in Arizona. And I also became actively involved in the social movement of the time, which was the immigrant rights movement, which is an important lesson about ethnic studies because you have to put what you learn into practice. And so I felt liberated. But I want to ask you the question, why do we have to wait to college until we have these experiences? Shouldn't it be available for our young people in high school and elementary schools across the nation? I believe so. Ethnic studies has a 45-year history in this country. It was in 1968, a group of multiracial students formed the Third World Liberation Front at San Francisco State University, and they staged the country's longest student strike. And at the end of this struggle, they achieved the creation of the first ethnic studies program at the college level. UC Berkeley followed the next year, and student activism of college students spread ethnic studies to every major college and university. And an entire generation of students have been trained to go back into their community and to use their knowledge that they learned about themselves and their communities and use these theoretical frameworks to go back and solve problems in their community and be active agents for social change. This movement was also at the high school level, and in 1968, the historic East LA walkouts was asking for the same things for high school students: bilingual education, Mexican American studies programs, culturally relevant curriculum. And here we are. We're not done with this struggle. 1998 was a defining moment in ethnic studies history. It was the year that the Ethnic Studies Department in Tucson, Arizona was created, the country's first and only district-wide ethnic studies program. And the Mexican American Studies program was the largest of the program. It was a national model for teachers like me. And the teachers in the Mexican American Studies program presented at conferences and freely shared their curriculum and their pedagogy. They invited us into their classrooms, and I was a student of those teachers. They had incredible academic results. 93% of the students in the Mexican American Studies were graduating from high school, and 85% of them were getting accepted into college. This compared to a district-wide average for Mexican American students not in the program of a 50% dropout rate. Equally important, students in the Mexican American Studies program, according to the 2012 Cabrera study, were outperforming their peers in reading, writing, and math. Now, the funny thing is about math is they didn't even teach math, right? So how is that possible? And I think it proves this point, is that the program was allowing students to develop that intellectual identity. It was a defining moment for those young people. And so despite all this success, in 2011, a group of politicians called this program un-American and unpatriotic and accused the teachers of trying to teach students to overthrow the government. Yeah, which was the furthest from the truth. And the community responded. Students and parents and teachers staged hundreds of walkouts and protests and sit-ins, and they took over the school board. And they galvanized an entire nation to defend the ethnic studies program in Tucson, Arizona. I was there in 2012 as part of the Libro Traficante book smuggling operation. We were putting contraband books by Latino authors in the trunk of our cars and taking them across territory that these books were illegal. You know, and one of the things that the students and the teachers told me was that we're happy that you're here, but the real movement is back in your respective local communities. Go back there and create your ethnic studies programs. So for the past 9 years, I've been engaged in that struggle. As a member of the People's Education Movement and organization, I've worked to create and share ethnic studies curriculum and develop ethnic studies pedagogy. And at the school that I teach at, Animo South Los Angeles, we have an 11-year history of offering ethnic studies classes to all of our 9th grade incoming students, and an elective also for upperclassmen in Chicano African American Studies. These are some of my students. And through an important collaborative relationship with my administrators and with the counselors and with the other academic disciplines in my school site, we have created, myself and the other teachers that have taught these classes, an academically rigorous course and program that focuses on reading and writing skills, that focuses on listening and speaking skills, that focuses on critical thinking, through a project-based approach to learning. And before I share some of my own curriculum, I just have to say, I don't have this all figured out. Being a teacher is a grind on a daily basis, and I am working to be better every single day. So these are my humble ideas, but they're research-focused, and they have results. An ethnic studies program has 3 components. Number 1, it needs to be decolonial. Number 2, it needs to be culturally relevant. And number 3, it needs to be community responsive and social justice based. What I mean by decolonial is that oftentimes students go through history classes and they believe that African American history began with slavery. And that's not true. We have thousands of years of history from our ancestors and those that came before us. The West African dancers that come to my school every year is one part of an entire curriculum that makes students understand knowledge of self and where we come from. The Aztec dancers that come to my school site are one example of an infusion of a curriculum that celebrates the indigeneity of our Chicano and our Latino students. We put Columbus on trial for crimes against indigenous people, right? And we look at history from different vantage points, and we connect how colonialism of 500 years has shaped the current economic, political, and social system that our students engage with in South LA. The course needs to be culturally relevant in it that it has to be specifically tailored to the community that you teach in. So I teach in a community that's half Latino and half African American, and one of the things that we focused on is celebrating and understanding the legacy and the lessons of the unsung heroes of American history. The program needs to be community responsive, in that my community is half Black and half brown. One of the centerpiece units that I teach is the missing chapter book on Black and brown unity. And I grab the state textbooks and I tell the students, hey, let's look for that chapter because, man, there's a whole lot written about it. And of course, we can't find the chapter. So I say, it's okay. The knowledge is out there. We'll create it together. And so we create the missing chapter book on Black and brown unity. This is a picture of 2 of my students. And I wanted to share one of the written ideas that came from my student, London. She's here on the left. And she said this about what she learned. Oftentimes, we grow up believing that Blacks and Latinos are arch rivals, only because we aren't taught any better. But how can we expect to be taught otherwise when our parents and our grandparents have been sheltered from the truth? And the truth is that Black and Latinos are not enemies, and in fact, they are allies and have faced many of the same struggles throughout the course of history. We need to address our struggles and unite with one another to try to overcome them. If we were to learn about how African and indigenous people came together in Mexico for the liberation of their collective struggles, then we should get the sense to do the same. And I think her words are profound in a lesson and an understanding that's absent from most schools that has a multiracial population. And finally, one of the most important lessons about ethnic studies is that ethnic studies is a struggle by itself. And so the students engaged in this innovative project that was brought to my attention by 2 friends of mine, Professor Elia Serna and Professor John Avalos Rios, who were creating pop-up books with their students. And the idea of the pop-up book is a simple idea. It's that 500 years ago, the Maya indigenous people books were burned by the Spaniards. 2 years ago, or in 2011, our books were banned in Arizona. So you can burn our books, you can ban our books, but the knowledge and the history and the struggle will always pop back up. It'll pop back up in Los Angeles. It'll pop back up in Amherst, Massachusetts. It'll pop back up in Chicago and all over the country. And so students were able to write essays and study about these different events, and they posted their work around the school site, and they invited their community members, and then we had a display at the Southern California Library, and I was contacted by a journalist from Latino USA, an NPR program. And what was really powerful is they came to interview my students about the project and about their experience in ethnic studies, and we had achieved what we sought to achieve at the beginning, which was to change the hearts and minds of people by reaching a national audience. And I remember the faces on my students and how proud they were when they were speaking into the microphone and when they heard their words and their ideas over the radio. Right now in Los Angeles, we're currently engaged in a historic struggle to bring ethnic studies students to all high school students in Los Angeles. My students recently wrote letters to the Los Angeles Unified School Board. According to the data from the California Department of Education, there's over 152,000 high school students in Los Angeles. Of those 152,000, only 691 are currently in an ethnic studies program. This in a school district that serves 90% students of color. It's time to change. It's time to transform. It's time to offer ethnic studies classes, not just for the high school students, but for elementary and middle school. 2 days from now, Tuesday, November 18th, I'm going to be joined by thousands of other people in Los Angeles who are going to be rallying in front of the school board. And we believe that this is a historical moment. Similar struggles are taking place in Texas. The 9th District Court of Appeals will be hearing a federal court case that's been brought against the state of Arizona for banning the ethnic studies classes. And my message to you is that you can create ethnic studies programs by writing resolutions for your local school board. You can go to your local community, your local school community, and you can encourage teachers and administrators to create these programs. If you're an educator, whatever discipline, whether it's science, math, or English, you can also create these programs. You can infuse ethnic studies pedagogy and ethnic studies curriculum into whatever academic discipline that you have. Our students need it. Their success is determined by us offering this type of learning and this type of transformative and liberating experience. And I want to end today with a poem that I begin my class every day with. It's a poem that comes from the Mayas. It's a concept called in Lakesh. It's thousands of years old to this continent that we live in. It's a poem written by Luis Valdez, who was a member of the United Farm Worker Movement. In Arizona, this is a poem that the government deemed illegal. In LA, this poem is popping up. And here's how it goes. And it's at the heart of what an ethnic studies class is about. In Lakesh, tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. Si te hago daño a ti, if I do harm to you, me hago daño a mí mismo. I do harm to myself. Si te amo y respeto, if I love and respect you, me amo y respeto yo. I love and respect myself. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Ron. Ron, you just inspire me. I get chills, man. Thank you. I've used this video with the work I was doing over in Santa Maria, and there's some very important points that you pointed out, and I want to share how we took those points and implemented them over in Santa Maria. One of the points you made at the very end was how to move the implementation of ethnic studies forward. I'm proud to share with you, this is a resolution that we created in our district before it was mandated throughout the state of California as a graduation requirement. And by the way, the whole resolution is also in the shared folder so that you can read it in its entirety. This was put out shortly after the murder of George Floyd. We felt as a district we needed to restate our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to our commitment to denouncing racism and racial discrimination, and affirming our commitment to ethnic studies. But if you read carefully, you'll see the words cultural competence. For example, on that third whereas, it recognizes cultural competence is necessary to identify implicit bias, macro and microaggressions, presumptions of privilege and entitlement, and systems of oppression. Those are the four, what we call the four barriers to cultural proficiency, by the way. And we're going to be breaking it out into an activity regarding those four barriers. But if you read where it is further resolved, the district is committed to ensuring that all staff are culturally proficient and will continue to provide and expand It's cultural competence training. So there's my tie-in. That is my artifact, if you will, of how the implementation of cultural proficiency will support you in implementing ethnic studies, will provide you with the lens and the understanding that it does begin with an inside-out process. And as Ron stated, there are three important components. He mentioned decolonization, culturally relevant. I've also included culturally responsive, and then the community response and social justice aspect of it. I will tell you this. What we did was we brought in ethnic studies experts, and we built a community movement. We actually met with students. I was the director of student services, and so I brought in students from the one and only Chicano Studies course that we had, plus other interested students. I brought in parents. I brought in community organizations like NAACP, LULAC, American GI Forum, and we built a coalition, if you will, to take it to the school board to bring on ethnic studies, and then shortly thereafter we built our collaboration with Cal Poly. And so it does take that community social justice approach to this. Some of the people I turned to were people like Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who talks about culturally relevant pedagogy, and she teaches us to use students' cultural knowledge and backgrounds. Sometimes I call it the funds of knowledge, right? In other words, we need to tap into the funds of knowledge of students and families to help us provide a high-quality education. Another person I turned to who I read a poem from her called Culture Counts was Dr. Geneva Gay. She says that we don't leave our cultures at the door when we enter the classroom, but that as teachers and students, those cultures can either clash or they can work together to provide a high-quality education. So I really like her work, too. And then, of course, this is from Dr. Loretta Hammond, where she provides the distinctions of equity. And there, smack in the middle, I would submit to you that all three of these pertain to ethnic studies or can be infused in ethnic studies. But there's the social justice education component that is really important to ethnic studies. I was going to show this video by Dr. Hammond, but I'm going to forego it in the interest of time because I really want us to have time to do the activity. But I will put this, by the way, a couple of people have asked me if they can have this presentation. I will upload it into your shared folder. You'll have access to it. You'll be able to go back and review it. And then there's this video, too, by Dr. Carter from University of California, Berkeley, where she talks about the whole critical race theory and really the misinformation of what we are teaching, what we're not teaching. And in your shared folder and in your packet, I've also included handouts from the California School Board Association and AXA on what is or what isn't ethnic studies, whether or not critical race theory is being taught there. It's good information. My evolution of the understanding the critical race theory pushback discussion is that, as Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw said, it's not, it used to be that we would just deny that we're talking about critical race, that we teach critical race theory, but invariably you're going to have critical thinking about race. And so the thing that now gets addressed, and she encourages us to address, is that we don't shy away from this critical thinking about race or critical discussions about race, but we recognize that CRT straw man or boogeyman, as they say, was developed so that it could undermine all our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So again, it's that misinformation, that ignorance, and that fear that we encounter when we're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and accessibility work, by the way. I'm not going to show this video either, but it's there for you. It'll be there for you when you have time to watch it on your own. All right, been doing a lot of talking. You saw a video. Now I'd like for you to do, if you have a Post-it on your table, I'd like for you to take 2 Post-its. We've shared a lot of information this morning already with you. This is called Give One, Get One. And I'd like for you to write down 2 takeaways from the information we've shared so far up to this point. It could be relative to the inside-out process. It could be the 4-fold call to action. It could be the information on ethnic studies, culturally responsive teaching, intersectionality. I heard that term being used this morning. Spot on. You decide 2 Post-its with 2 of your takeaways. And in a moment, we're going to ask you to get up, take your 2 Post-its, find someone you don't know, and exchange a Post-it. And then we'll do that again. You'll find somebody else, exchange a Post-it. Okay? So take about 2 minutes to write down some key takeaways from this presentation so far. All right. I'd like to hear out from the main room if somebody would care to share either their takeaway from this morning's presentation or perhaps maybe one that was shared with you. So raise your hand.
Hi. The one that I received from someone is, why should students have to wait until college to feel liberated, empowered, and seen? It should be happening at all levels. And that really resonated with me because my daughter started teaching recently, and she coached the Latino Knowledge Bowl at her elementary school, and I was in the auditorium watching students so excited to give answers about Latino heroes and singers and dancers and just important historical figures, and they loved learning in that moment, and they were so joyful. And to me, it was a moment of understanding the power of ethnic studies at every level.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Someone else.
Yeah, just thanks for sharing the talk. I appreciate that very much. And I think one of the things that I wanted to share was just like, that was almost 10 years ago, right, since that talk was given, and there's been so much progress since then, right? Just even seeing this room full of folks that are all tasked with creating ethnic studies courses at our schools is a really incredible just point to think about how much has happened in the last 9-10 years, and then 60 years overall with the movement. But one of the things I wanted to share is that as the mandate for the courses is happening, the ethnic studies courses, this is also just such the opportunity to create that interdisciplinary ethnic studies approach in other academic disciplines. And it's the message I've always shared is it can start with 2 people, 5 people, move to 10 people, move to 20, and then bring others on board. And there may be some teachers that are still reluctant in certain academic departments, but if we start with the willing, we could really first, yes, create the courses, but then also that infusion across academic disciplines. And the same goes for
The same goes for?
The same goes for K-8, right? Just elementary ethnic studies is so important as well, and the young folks can really benefit from it. And even though it's not mandated, we can go back to our school districts and create that. And then just finally, like, there's so much sharing here that we can learn from each other, and so many people are engaging in best practices, and so this is an opportunity to also share and then reciprocate that sharing. I want to give a shout out to William Sanchez in the back from Riverside Unified, who's been so willing to share a lot of the resources that they've created over there, and other people have shared a lot of great resources as well.
What I like to say when I was implementing this at our district was we need to move away from just heroes, holidays, and food, right? We need to go deeper. It needs to move away from Hispanic Heritage Month, African American Month. I mean, they're good for awareness, but when people tell me, well, when are we going to get there? I say when we move ethnic studies from the fringe to the mainstream. Pretty much to the point that Ron had talked about. There's a book out there right now that was actually written by Sylvia Mendez, titled "Separate is Not Equal." That's a book that I encourage for elementary schools, for example, to start the awareness of culture and the importance of it. So we really want to move away from tokenism to more authentic understanding and really addressing perhaps the part that's most difficult for people, especially those that are resistant, is the impact on power, the power systems that are at play. sometimes there's that fear that, I know that in my experience at Santa Maria, when we were building the coalition to bring ethnic studies on board, teachers that didn't fully understand, or administrators that didn't fully understand ethnic studies were intimidated when we had about 500 people show up to a school board meeting, and pretty much everybody wanted to bring on ethnic studies. It's pretty powerful when you see that dynamic shift.